You're listening to the Gap Podcast with your host, me, Morgan McGill. As we talk God and politics, my prayer is that you're inspired and encouraged to be a part of filling the God-sized gap in the political sphere. Enjoy the show. Welcome back to The Gap. I'm your host, Morgan McGill, and I'm so excited about my next guest. She's actually my former boss. When you really think about it, you are. She's my former boss, and she is awesome. She's so inspirational. Her relationship to the Lord is one of the most inspiring things to me. How clearly you hear from God. It's one of those things that I just can't wait until I am at that level. And you are such an inspiration to me in the political realm as well. And I can't wait for you to tell your story about how you got involved in politics. So without further ado, my guest, Amy Reichert, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
I love you so much. And your story, your testimony, I do want you to tell a little bit about your testimony before we jump into your political story, because it is something that is so inspiring. And I know that a lot of people listening would also be equally as inspired by how much God has transformed your life. So I want to open that to you.
I was adopted when I was a baby, which was a miracle in and of itself, just God's providence. And I was adopted by a very loving family, and I was raised Jewish. My parents, Fran and Myron, my mom was a secretary, and my dad worked at FedMart. And if people remember FedMart, that's probably because they're a little bit older, but it was the 1970s version of Walmart. My dad worked at the jewelry and camera counter, and he loved it. He was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis when I was 8 years old, and that's when he wasn't allowed to keep his job anymore. This is before Americans with Disabilities Act, and that's when the light really went out in his eyes after he wasn't able to work anymore. And my mom became the simultaneous caregiver and breadwinner for me and my two younger brothers. So processing all of that growing up and my dad being in a wheelchair, I was bat mitzvahed when I was 13 years old. And it was shortly after that that I really was very angry at God. I just asked God, if you're such a good God, why are there incurable diseases? Mm-hmm. And if you're such a great God, why don't you cure him? Why don't you heal him? So I pretty much turned my back on God and went on to college. I got my degree in political science. And then after I graduated from college, my mom that raised me, and I consider her my mom, told me my biological mother's name. And that's when I went on a search, and this was before Google, and I found my biological mother. Now, a couple more years go by, I get married to my high school sweetheart, and I was pregnant with our first child, and that's when I was 8 months pregnant. My dad, who was only 56 years old, died of complications of multiple sclerosis. Mm. And then 5 weeks later, after a normal, uncomplicated pregnancy, in fact, I was a week overdue, my daughter Ashley was unexpectedly born in a coma. And she only survived for 3 days in the NICU. And I held her in my arms as her heartbeat faded and her life was over as quickly as it begun. After that, the sadness was bottomless. They did not know what to do with me. The nurses and doctors, I had emergency grief counseling, and they put me on every single antidepressant known to man, I believe, and in the strongest doses possible. It wasn't that I ever wanted to take my own life, it's just that I didn't want to go on living. So at the time, I just continued to be really angry at God. And that anger, when you're angry at God, it doesn't just go outward to God, it goes inward too. And I became a very angry person. And I turned to alcohol. I was diagnosed with major depression and post-traumatic stress disorder. And my marriage to my husband, who was my high school sweetheart, they say that marriages that go through the loss of a child have an 80% divorce rate. And we didn't make the 20% cut. So it was after the divorce, I really think that's when I hit true rock bottom. And I just really had nowhere else to go but Jesus. And a friend said, "Hey, why don't you come to my church? It's non-denominational." And I said, "How non-denominational can it be? I'm Jewish." So finally, in 2004, I decided to take her up on it. And I walked into that church, and I remember just sitting in the back row, just like, okay, what are these crazy Christians going to do? I just want to be near the closest exit. And it was the most amazing message, of course, that night. It was actually he went on to become the chief of lifeguards in the city of San Diego, which is the highest ranking position you can have. Well, he gave the message that night. He actually graduated from seminary, and he told this amazing story of a water rescue. And yes, I was one of those people that when he said at the end of the service, if you'd like to give your heart to the Lord, please raise your head. And I did. And I remember thinking after that, I know what I believe. I just want to know what I know I believe. So I was a licensed private investigator at the time. I left out that part. After I found my biological mother, I became a licensed private investigator. So I investigated the Bible, and I just fell more and more in love with Jesus.
Yeah.
And before I knew it, I was on staff at a church. I'd been a new Christian for like 10 months, and I had gotten sober at 9 months. So I've been sober now for 20 years. So there's so much more to my testimony. God's done such amazing things, but that was my God rescue story.
Isn't it amazing how literally as soon as you make that decision, everything just changes. Everything shifts in your life. It's just that one decision, that one yes, Jesus, come into my life, and my life is radically transformed from when I accepted the Lord too. So it's just amazing to hear how much He's done in your life and how much He's continuing to do in your life. I want you to tell our listeners how the Lord led you from working in a church and being in a new Christian all the way to now where you're now politically active. How did that look? Like where did that transition point of when you decided, I now need to get involved. I need to be the change that I want to see?
So I wound up being in full-time ministry about a year and a half after I became a Christian, but I was also a single mom at the time. So my ex-husband and I, we did have our son Alex, and he's now 24. So there I was, a single mom at a church, and that's when the church said, "Hey, we'll pay for you to go to seminary if you want to." So I went to seminary, and I went on to become a licensed minister at Eastlake Church and became one of the first female licensed ministers. But all that time, my heart... the desire of my heart was to be in love again. And I prayed for a Christian man. And apparently God takes our prayers very literally, because I met my husband Christian on eHarmony. So we met in 2009. We got married in 2010. He didn't have any children of his own. And we were in our 40s when we got married, and the doctors told us, you have less than a 5% chance of ever getting pregnant. And me, like my can-do, hopeful spirit, I'm like, so you say there's a chance?
Yes.
So we did get pregnant through IVF when I was 42 years old on our first round, and we gave birth to my son Christian 3 weeks after I turned 43. And I think one of the most beautiful things about that was my daughter's, the anniversary of her death was February 13th. And when I went to the doctor, and the doctor said, "You're pregnant," and they figure out the due date was exactly my daughter's anniversary of her death. But my son, Christian, was not born on that day. He was born the day after, on Valentine's Day. So, just God is amazing. There's
Redeemer.
A lot of life that happened. It was hard being a single mom. Church ministry is tough. But wow, when you pray and God shows up like that, it just strengthens your faith so much. So, here we are, and it was 2020, and I will never forget what happened. And I want to share this story because it led me into politics, but in the most unlikely of ways. So it's 2020, and they shut down the beaches in San Diego.
That was the worst.
And then they decided to reopen it. So at the time, my son Christian was 9 years old, and I'm like, let's go to the beach on opening day. So we go out there, and they've got police cars guarding the parking lots because apparently COVID was spread all over that parking lot. But it was okay to park on the side streets.
Yeah.
So we made our way to the beach, and I'll never forget, he had the boogie board over his head. He was just celebrating, running towards the waves.
Aww.
And I go to put my blanket down in my chair. And that's when a very good-looking San Diego lifeguard came up to me and said, "You can't sit here." And I'm like, huh? And he's like, well, you can sit down the coast where I can't see you. But then I said, well, then you can't see my son. So he said, well, you have to keep moving. So I did what any good mother would do. I basically did Madonna's version of Starlight for the next 90 minutes in the sand. So my son could enjoy, being in the ocean and in the waves because he'd been trapped behind screens for months, with Zoom school. So fast forward a couple weeks later, where I live, there were riots that broke out, and 3 buildings were burned down. And in my neighborhood, we had the National Guard come in. There were nightly curfews at 6:30 p.m. There was the constant beat of helicopters over our head 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Tensions were really high. And so I remember a couple weeks afterwards feeling depressed. But then I immediately attached a different feeling to it. I realized I was feeling powerless. So I was standing in the middle of my kitchen, and I saw a very clear picture of me, but 25 years from now, looking back at me now and saying, why didn't you do anything?
Wow.
And then the next image was me, but 18 years old in 1986, right? With heavy black eyeliner and a lot of Aquanet in my hair, looking at me now, just going, I thought we would do something when we grew up.
Wow.
And so I stood in the middle of my kitchen with my arms outstretched, and I said, okay, God, I know I'm supposed to do something. I just don't know what. Show me what to do.
Yeah.
Well, so my first logical step, of course, was to speak out on Facebook. And my Facebook was private. It was just my friends or my family, people you went to high school with. But I started reading a lot about what was going on locally, how we were shut down in our area, but other parts of the country were reopening. I started seeing the inconsistency from our county health officials to the CDC, and I started posting with how it wasn't matching up. And I'd always put my licensed private investigator number. So I'm a California state licensed investigator, 21006. And I would put that this has been double and triple fact-checked. And then I stumbled across this Facebook group called Reopen San Diego. And they were meeting at a local park. And so I went out there, and there were just 5 people, just 5 of us sitting on a lawn. And we would meet every Tuesday. And then finally, the state decided to take a turn, and they were going to shut us down. This is late 2020. The rest of the country's reopening.
Fully opened, yeah.
And they're just going to shut everything down again. And that's when I said, we need to do something. We need to take action. And we had our very first rally. And that was the beginning of many rallies. and many wins. But that's how I got involved, was by doing what I knew God was calling me to do. Yeah. And I knew at that very moment, standing in my kitchen saying, okay, God, I know I'm supposed to do something. Now, show me what to do. I had to cross that line.
Yeah.
I knew that I was feeling depressed and powerless, and that if I continued to remain silent, that I would live a quiet life of desperation, and it would be painful.
Yeah.
But I knew by crossing that line, that was also going to be painful.
Yeah.
But it was going to be more painful to remain silent.
Friends, in over 15 years in the political sphere, I cannot tell you how many times I've seen amazing men and women forego running for office because they have no idea where to start. And on the other side of that, I can't tell you how many times I have seen amazing candidates fumble the ball so hard because they have no idea what they're doing when they decide to run for office. That is why I founded Revival Consulting. The heart of this company is to help God-fearing men and women get elected to local, state, and federal office, because we see a country where the men and women in positions of political power and influence know and love God. If that's you, if you're considering running for office but you have no idea where to start, or you need help, go to itsrevival.com and fill out our consultation form, because we want to help you. We need your voice now more than ever. If you have seen anything that's going on in the world today, you know that you were put on this planet for such a time as this, and we need you. So please don't hesitate. Go to itsrevival.com and fill out our consultation form today. Amen. And in that obedience, you were able to change the lives of a lot of people who felt isolated and alone. You were able to get the one thing that people were missing the most in that season was community, and you helped open up the door for community by through these rallies and through other events. And I want you to talk about some of the wins that are attached to that obedience, because I think that's very important. In the obedience, what God can do when you actually say yes to him, to what he's asking you to do, the things that God can do through you, and you know that you can't do it alone. And thinking back, it's like, wow, I was able to accomplish so much. I was able to do all these things, but God was the one. His hand was on it the whole time.
One of the things I'm really proud of is that we stood up for religious liberties.
Yeah.
And we decided to file a federal lawsuit in federal court because our local city passed a law saying that if you didn't get the COVID shot, you couldn't hold elected office, you couldn't work for the city, you couldn't volunteer, you couldn't go to a city council meeting, and you couldn't serve on a board or commission. And I said, you know what? That just sounds wildly unconstitutional to me. This is the hill I'm going to die on.
Amen.
So we raised money. We got great attorneys, and I'm so proud of the fact that we were able to prevail. A federal court judge agreed, and we were able to get that mandate struck down. And in the process, we wound up saving over 2,000 city worker jobs, including many first responders. But there was also the spiritual all along.
Yeah.
And I always felt that Reopen San Diego was a ministry. So in many ways, we operated like a community, a connected community. And we would have meetup groups, and people were just so aching for connection. But people were also starting to wake up, and many of these people were atheists. And they would come to me, and because they knew where I stood with Christ. And I never, ever beat anybody over the head with the Bible. Just people know that I'm a woman of faith. And I'm not ashamed to talk about my faith. And so I would have people come up to me and say things like, I'm an atheist, but over the past couple years, I've been sensing that there is true evil in the world. And because there is true evil, there must be a good.
Yeah.
Someone else came to me from a Jewish background and said, you know, Amy, Judaism doesn't really explain the concept of spiritual warfare, but Christianity does. And then my co-founder of my nonprofit, she was a professed Buddhist. And I knew that God put us together for a reason. So this was November of 2020. I posted my testimony on Facebook. I just felt like people needed some hope. And she texted me, "Hey, I just read your story on Facebook, and I want to go to church with you sometime."
Oh my gosh.
Right, that's the answer you want to hear after you tell your testimony, right?
Yeah.
Before I could even answer, because guess what? I wasn't going to church at the time. The church that I had been going to had closed down.
Wow.
Right? It was all online. And before I could even answer, she's like, "Hey, I hear this local church is defying Gavin Newsom. Let's go to that one." And then we wound up going there.
Was it my church?
It was not, but I love your church. And I remember just feeling at home there. And I had really kind of wandered through churches the past years leading up to that. And she wound up giving her heart to Christ.
Amazing.
And reconciling with her ex-husband. And
Wow.
their family is back together.
Wow.
And now he's a believer. So that is the kind of fruit that really excites me.
Yeah. It's so, God is such a redeemer. And it's so cool to see how he's moved. Just like he is, when you attach your yes to God, you are invincible and you can do so much. And not only that, but God uses you to bring others to him. And it makes my heart so happy that you have been able to inspire so many people to come to Christ just through your obedience in Reopen San Diego alone. And since then, you've also been called to actually run for office. And
It's a calling, all right.
Yes. It is not easy. As someone who has ran myself, it is really not easy. So how did that look for you when you decided to, I know how that looked for you, but I want everyone else to hear how that looked for you when you attached your yes to running for office, because that's a huge yes.
That was another God story. So every 10 years, there's a census, and then different district lines get redrawn. And my community wound up being redrawn into a new district.
You can say the name if you want to.
Oh, okay. And so I found myself in the same district as Nathan Fletcher.
Yeah.
And Nathan Fletcher was the chair of the County Board of Supervisors and really the chief lockdowner.
Yeah, he was.
And the chief divider in San Diego. Truly, he used the pandemic to just incite more culture wars, the name-calling, the division. And so when it looked like the lines were going to be redrawn and I was going to be in his district, I just laughed. I looked up at God and I'm like, this is the craziest map I've ever seen.
Yeah.
This has got to be you. I will, if you do this map, because it was before they finalized it, I will run against him. And I just laughed. So I didn't know what I was quite getting into. So I did. I felt called. I felt it was my duty to challenge him.
Yeah.
And I learned a lot about myself. You were my campaign manager, and you were and we ran a grassroots heart and hustle campaign.
Yeah.
We won over a lot of people. And if you're listening right now, I was running against the most powerful man in the county.
Yeah.
And one of the most powerful men in the state.
Like literally best friends with Gavin Newsom. Powerful. Yeah.
Yeah. And he was married to the most powerful woman in San Diego County, head of the labor unions here. So, and just to give you guys a little bit of inside baseball, it was a very uphill battle. The district, you're probably not even going to believe this when you hear this, 49% Democrat. 19% Republican, and then the rest is no party preference or other. So what political insiders refer to that as a D+30 district. That is a no-go. If you're a Republican, you don't even think about running in that.
And you don't even think about donating to someone
You don't
running.
even think about donating or volunteering for somebody that would take on a race like that. In fact, if you are a good candidate, you will think about selling your house and moving to a safe Republican district where you can run against 5 other good Republicans.
Yes,
and
things that we decided we didn't need to believe in.
No. So here's the thing. I prayed for a miracle, and I trusted God no matter what.
Yeah.
And it was an amazing experience. I did not prevail against Nathan Fletcher. Can I share the story of the vision that I had? So during the campaign trail, different churches would invite me. Then they would have me stand up. Sometimes they'd have me speak, introduce me to the congregation. Well, on one occasion, I was at Awaken in El Cajon.
My church, my campus.
That's right. And it was during worship. And let me just tell you, no, I don't normally have visions during worship. Just preface it by that. And what happened was I had a very clear vision that Nathan Fletcher was being devoured by a sea of demons. It was graphic. It was like a movie. And then I said to you after the service, I said, hey, I just had this vision. And then your reply, Morgan, was, I've had the same downloads from the Lord.
Yeah.
So I will never forget. I do the same 3-mile walk every day, rain or shine. And on my walk, I stopped in my tracks and I started praying, God, through a specific circumstance, bring Nathan Fletcher to his knees in a place of surrender where he repents and he gives his heart to you. Mm-hmm. And if you could do that before November 7th, Jesus, that would be awesome. No, I didn't say that part. Mm-hmm. I said the first part, and I remember
and you thought the second part.
But I thought the second part. Love you, Jesus. And I remember just being shocked, like how specific that prayer was. Mm-hmm. So I did not prevail against Nathan Fletcher, but I've always had a can-do spirit. Life goes on. You get up. You go to fight for another day. The very next day after the results came in, I wound up doing a live stream, Instagram, my 3-mile walk, and I shared my testimony. Mm-hmm. And I really just said, take courage, have hope. It's not over. So I didn't bury my head in the sand after that. Then about 6 weeks went by, and a group of Christian professors came to me and they said, the Board of Trustees has started to fire us over our religious beliefs. They've approved our religious exemptions, but they are firing us anyway. And it was over the COVID shot. And they fired 3 professors in January at their Board of Trustees meeting, and they were planning to fire 50 more in March. And I said, I'm all in. I'm going to throw everything and the kitchen sink at them. Launched a huge PR blitz against the district. We had, we were going up against a very arrogant chancellor who had gotten COVID himself 4 or 5 times, was proud about it. And he was saying it was the Christian professors were the danger, which was ridiculous. By that time, the student vaccine mandate had been lifted. There was no reason why these professors should lose their livelihoods. One professor in particular was a professor of mathematics. She was 6 months pregnant, and they were forcing her to get the shot or lose her job. So I was really happy that we were able to save their jobs. Mm-hmm. And I'll never forget, if you know what the Jewish holiday Purim is, it is based upon the book of Esther. Well, the decision to not fire them and then reinstate the professors that were fired, it happened right before Purim. And I turned to the Christian professors and I go, wouldn't it be interesting if the chancellor who tried to fire you was the one that winds up getting fired? Well, he was forced to resign 2 weeks later because he handled it so poorly.
Oh my gosh.
It was biblical in proportions.
Yes.
It was beautiful. And I just remember, I'm like, you know what? Life goes on. You go on to fight another day. And I was feeling so good about myself. And I woke up one morning and my phone had blown up. There were all these text messages. And I'm like, what the heck? And I look, and it's like text message after text message. You won't believe what Nathan Fletcher just posted on Twitter. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, what? And I go to Twitter, and it's this full confessional of him admitting that he was struggling with demons, the demon of alcoholism and post-traumatic stress disorder.
Things that you had suffered through and had gotten healing from, which is why you were able to see it so clearly.
Yes. Yeah. And so he has since resigned, and there's been a special election called, and I'm still the underdog. This one was quite the race so far. I ran against two very strong Democrats. No one had me making the runoff. But I'm here in the runoff. The election was just 2 weeks ago. So I believe that God answered the prayer number one, miracle number one. I'm holding out for miracle number two.
Yeah.
But I'm trusting God no matter what.
And this is going to air after your election. So hopefully, whatever happens, we're believing for victory. Whatever happens, I'm excited for what God's going to continue to do through you, because he's already done so much. And you're winning over hearts and minds just by being you. And it just excites me for our San Diego. So I do want to ask you before we go, what would you recommend to people listening who felt this or feel the same way that you felt when you felt like you needed to do something and you just didn't know what to do, and you're just like, God, what do I do? What would you recommend to someone who's listening who feels like you did, and they feel, God, I need to do something. I just don't know what to do.
Find your tribe. Find other people that are just as passionate about what you believe. Mm-hmm. I think the big first step, though, is having the courage to speak out and not be afraid. Don't be afraid to be called names. I've been called every name in the book. I was called a Nazi for wanting the safe reopening of schools in late 2020. So I joke now. I'm like, the rabbi that bat mitzvahed me in 1983 would be pretty shocked.
Yeah.
So first of all, you have to have courage to speak out your own convictions. And maybe for some people, it's just going to be sharing Jesus with a coworker, right? Sharing your story. And I think the best way to do that, everybody, because I was raised Jewish, and I have been the recipient of every bad witnessing attempt. I could tell you so many bad witnessing attempts that went the wrong way.
Yeah.
I think when you share your story with people, when you lead with that, what God has done in your life. But if you want to get involved politically, you don't have to show up to your local Democrat or Republican meeting to do that. You don't have to. I do suggest volunteering on somebody's campaign that you really strongly believe in what they stand for. That's a great way to get started. But if there is a specific issue that God is tugging on your heart, that God's saying you're the one that needs to stand up, because nobody else would. In 2020, nobody was standing up for common sense. In San Diego, there were elected officials that were afraid. They were staying silent. And I'll tell you what, it is so powerful when you speak out into existence what people are thinking in their heads and believe in their hearts, but they are afraid to say themselves. Oh my God. Yeah, you're going to get some people that will unfriend you, but you're going to get 5 new best friends. I guarantee it. Mm-hmm. My relational world, my community, wow, It has just expanded in so many beautiful ways. And I think that's what's really cool. I'm like, okay, God, well, what's next? So that I just would really encourage anybody, if there's something that you feel really strongly about, the best thing to do is to speak truth, but also speak it in love.
I agree with that 100%. And any closing thoughts other than that that you would like to add on to before we go?
One of my favorite stories. So this is when I was a single mom, and it was really hard being a single mom. And I remember picking up my then 6-year-old from school, and my ex-husband and I, we were able to have a child. Sadly, though, our marriage ended in divorce, like I said. But so I was a single mom, and my 6-year-old is in the back seat, and I picked him up from school, and I'm listening to NPR, and there's this story, and it's this mom, and she's saying, my mom always used to say, and then she was curious. She turned to her own children, and she asked her kids, what does mom always say? And she was really nervous to ask her kids that. And I remember being at a stoplight and gripping the steering wheel and thinking, oh my gosh, if I ask my 6-year-old right now, what does mom always say? What will be his answer? So I remember looking in the rearview mirror and seeing him sitting so cute in the back seat. And I said, what does mom always say? And he looked up and he said, and I'll never forget what he said. He goes, never give up. Never give up, Mom. That's what you always say. So that's what I'd like to close with. Wherever you are right now, whatever you're working through, truly there is hope in Christ, and never give up.
Amazing. Thank you so much for being on with me today. It is a pleasure, as always, to spend time with you. I cannot wait to see what God does through you next, because I know it's going to be epic, because it's already been so epic watching God move through you. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you liked what you heard, don't forget to share it and make sure you subscribe to our channel so you don't miss an episode. Now go out in the world and make disciples. We'll catch you in the next one.